if you have a decision, like if somebody does, like invites you to do something, like just default to saying yes if it will make a good story.
You're listening to AudioLife. We're your hosts today, Carrie Purcell
and Ghaffar Masood. This is the podcast where we tell your story in your words.
And I'm super excited for our conversation today with Derek Martin. Derek, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I'm glad for you to meet Ghaffar today as well. This conversation is just going to be a chance for us to talk about some of your favorite stories. So let's get started.
Straight off the bat, Derek, if you were to share one story with the world, which would it be and why?
Wow.
He only gets to pick one?
In this case, we're just going right there.
Yeah.
It's one story.
Okay, so I'll start with one that's just kind of made me question reality, and it doesn't involve any drugs. It was 2009, I think. I was out in the high desert of Colorado with a man named Dr. Stephen Greer and a bunch of other people who do meditations and try to initiate contact with UFOs. Yeah, so this is called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, or CE5. And you essentially do it by concentrating and like visualizing where you are on planet Earth, and you kind of zoom out into like, so that you're way in space looking at planet Earth, and then zoom back in, and even from beyond the Milky Way galaxy, you're zooming into like this planet over from the sun to what area of the planet you're on. And you're kind of trying to share that thought as like a visual map of how to get where you are. This is the middle of nowhere. Like you can turn around 360 degrees and all you see is horizon. And it's also super cold because there's no vegetation to retain the heat. Even being a Canadian, I was colder there than I have ever been in winter here. It was unbelievable. And we're sitting there, we've seen some lights doing curious things. Something you're supposed to do is verbalize anytime you see or think you see anything that's weird. Consciously I had that in my mind, but it's pitch black. It's like 2:00 in the morning. There's not even any roads or lights or anything anywhere. And just for like a split second, I thought I saw the silhouette of a balcony with a silhouette of a person on the balcony about 12 feet off the ground. And it was so fast. I was like, now that had to be like somebody's flashlight hitting a cactus, causing a shot. Like, your brain just goes, that's nothing. Like when you hear a creak in your house at night, you're like, you don't even think about it. 2 seconds later, this lady, 2 people down in the circle from me, just says, hey, I think we're inside like a partially materialized UFO right now because I see a balcony with a bunch of beings on it staring down at us. My mind was completely blown. It's like you just daydream something at work and your buddy goes, hey, did you just think about this? Like, what? No, you can't do that. So then I piped up and said, actually, I just saw that a second ago, but I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. And Greer was like, I told you, you got to verbalize when you see anything or think you might have seen something, because now you just confirmed what she was saying, and she was probably thinking she was crazy before she said it. But because you confirmed it now, it worked out. But if you had held your tongue, she would never know if anybody else felt bad or not. And so it was a moment for me where I was definitely like, I just had something that I thought was my imagination completely confirmed by somebody else virtually instantaneously. I'm still not fully sure what that means and what the implications are, but it definitely has something to do with the world we live in not being totally as it seems. And I think that's a common thread that runs through my life and a lot of my stories. Things look normal or seem normal, but if you just pull back the sheets a little bit, it's all of a sudden really weird.
That's wild. I don't know, Ghaffar, if you want to pick up on that, or I can jump in.
I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I'm ready to have received that story. I wish I never asked that question at the beginning. I'm having a little bit of an existential crisis and a little bit of a meltdown.
I feel like there's so much there, and I have 100 follow-up questions. I'll ask maybe 2 of them. What experiences did you have that took you to that retreat? And also the woman who shared your vision, did you keep in touch with her? Did you talk to her about it?
I think we exchanged a few email after that. And we did talk about it during the rest of that retreat. We were out there for 7 days, staying at
Yeah.
a little motel in the nearby town of Crestone. You know, we chatted about the fact that no, really, you have to verbalize everything, no matter
Yeah.
how crazy you feel. I've always been interested in all kinds of paranormal, supernatural, weird, strange stuff, as far back as I can remember. I'll say on the like UFO front, we used to go to stay at a cottage on Lake Huron every summer,
Mm.
which we rented the cottage, but every year for like 40 years. You know, occasionally we would see weird lights in the sky that would like pull a right angle turn. It's like, well, a
Mm.
satellite can't do right angle turns. And neither can planes if they're going fast enough, right? Otherwise the pilot gets smushed by G forces. Or we would see things that look like they're kind of floating on the water and then they just go straight up. So I was intrigued by that. One day my dad was driving home from the cottage. He up on the road ahead, there's a little town you have to drive through to get back to where my house was. So he was approaching that town and he saw a huge object above the road. So he kept driving forward because he's got to go down that road until he was like under this thing. So he pulled over and rolled down his window because it was like a crank window and
Yeah.
just looked out its window like, what the heck? And it was a huge black triangle about the size of a football field, completely silent, about 400 feet above his truck. And there was a light on each corner of the triangle. And like my dad is not into UFOs or anything. He was a Bell telephone technician. Like he literally worked on analog stuff and was very handy, is very handy.
Yeah.
So there's in the middle of the triangle, there's a red glowing light, like an orb, and it detached from the triangle and started spiraling down towards his truck. And that's when he pretty much noped out and just said nope, floored it, and came home. But he came running in the house and was like, get the binoculars, get the telescope, like get out here, get out in the yard. So we got this stuff and we went out in the yard. And we could see it like over the nearby town because it was big enough to see. You know, about a minute or two later, 2 fighter jets came in to try and intercept this thing. And it just took off like in the blink of an eye, it was gone over the horizon. And the 2 fighter jets just kind of circled the area once and then went back the way they came. They were like, well, we're not touching that. So
Jeez.
that was crazy. And then the other big thing was one night I was sleeping in my room where I had my head kind of like the window was beside my head, so I couldn't see out the window laying down. But outside that window, there was the roof of our kitchen was kind of below my window, and then there's a huge maple tree, and then a barn and forest. And so there's nothing back there, no roads, no anything. And the huge maple tree blocked most of the view too. Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night and my entire room was flooded in bright white light, like blinding white light. And I remember getting up and going to the window and opening the curtain or the blind and just looking at it. And I couldn't see anything out the window except bright white light. Um,
Mm.
and my nature is very curious. Even today, like if I see something, a weird light at night, I like turn down the side road to go follow it and see, like, wonder what that is, right? But this time I just remember thinking to myself, I should go back to sleep now. And I just turned and went and got back into my bed. Not long after that, I saw the cover of a book called Communion by Whitley Strieber, and it has the face of a gray alien on the front with the almond eyes and stuff. And I remember being completely terrified by that picture, which now, in retrospect, I kind of connect with that event, but I don't remember anything about the light. I just know that fear started around that time. And I didn't mention
Jeez.
this to my parents ever, but
Yeah.
I'm 46 now, and when I was 40, my wife and I were hanging out with my mom at the family cottage and just talking about stuff. And I was like, oh, one time when I was like sometime between 10 or maybe 13 years old, this happened. And my mom goes, that happened to your dad and me too. And I was like, what? And
Ooh.
she goes, yeah, your dad was walking down the hallway downstairs, and there's a window on the right side. And he said, like, Rebecca, come here, look at this. And she goes over, and they're both looking out the window, and there's just bright, blinding white light coming in the window. And then he turned to my mom and said, I think we should go to sleep now. And she goes, yep. And they just went straight upstairs and to sleep. And that was
Wow.
another one of those, like, what the heck? That's so weird.
Okay, so I was totally going to ask you if people thought it was just a dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I had this experience. It's not the same, and apparently it's medically a thing that can happen. So I had this experience where I woke up in bed, and I heard my brother and dad come home, and I think they had been. It was late. They had been out at some hockey game or something. I heard them come home, but I realized, and I tried to call out to them. I could my door was open just this much. I could see the light. I could see movement. And when I would try to call out to them, I realized I couldn't speak.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized I couldn't move.
Mm-hmm.
But I could hear everything they were saying, and I knew where they had been when, I didn't see the clock, but roughly when they came in. And then whatever, I fell back asleep. And so I told people about it the next day, and everyone was like, well, you were dreaming. And I was like, well, I wasn't. What time did you come? You talked about this. You walked here. This is what happened. And they were like, yeah, but you were probably dreaming.
Yeah.
And much later in life, it was confirmed to me that there's that people have experienced that. It's a medical thing. It's your mind wakes up before your body does. Your body's still asleep. It's totally a thing. But the number of people that have told me oh, you're probably dreaming. And I'm like, I was not dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that's when you were telling that story, I was like, how many people were you're dreaming? I'm not saying you were, but
right. Yeah, it's called sleep paralysis, the condition you experience.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of debate about that in the UFO ET community of were you just dreaming that aliens came into your room? And the people are like, I was conscious. This was a real, it felt so visceral, right? And the sleep paralysis thing is definitely, it's real. You're awake. You just can't control your body, and it can be terrifying. And I would assume that if there were beings in the room that you didn't recognize, it would be way more terrifying.
What makes this really kind of mind-blowing is, so I've had a few sleep paralysis experiences myself, and they're closely linked to, people talk about astral projection or out-of-body experiences and so on. But what makes this a real doozy is the fact that your parents had a very similar experience. And the thing that I can't quite get over is, go back to sleep. You're sleepy now. I must go back to sleep. And you mentioned earlier, you're a very inquisitive mind. When you see lights, you're very, you want to see it. You want to check something out if it's interesting. So that's very uncharacteristic of you, right? Do you have any thoughts about that? Was it cognitive perception being changed, or do you have any ideas behind that?
The only thing I could posit at the time was that there was some kind of hypnotic suggestion or some kind of mind control going on that may have been, maybe that could have been induced just directly to the brain, or maybe the white light had some effect that caused something like that. But for the wording to be so specific between me and my parents, that's quite strange. Recently, I've heard that the military does have some technology where they can, and this sounds totally sci-fi and crazy, but they can make a voice in your head sound like your own voice and say whatever they want. They can make it sound like any voice, but so there could be a situation where you think you're talking to yourself, but it's actually someone else speaking to you inside your head with your own voice. I'm not saying it was the military doing it, because who am I? I was nobody, just living in the country as a kid. But I'm saying if the military has that, then someone with more advanced technology, presumably that's not a big deal for them. I think about the fact that I was and am nobody in this field a lot. It's why would this stuff happen to me? There's no, other than the fact that I'm open to it, there's not a real reason for that.
There's a lot of anecdotal accounts of these kinds of things. And this is probably my first time, I'm not sure about Carrie's, hearing it directly. And, it just is mind blowing, because it's very authentic. You have no reason to have, or, say these things, so have you or your parents, when you've experienced these things, have you tried to piece together the meaning behind it, why it might be, or you're just confused as I am right now?
It's funny, sometimes weird things happen and people don't talk about them at all. Or not because they don't necessarily want to, but for some reason it never occurs to them. I've heard about people encountering something spooky or scary, and they're so scared in the moment that they don't talk about it on the way home, and they just end up never talking about it, right? And it's that's a very strange thing. Do they not want to think each other are crazy? They were there at the same time. They had the same experience. Why wouldn't you want to talk about it unless there is some sort of weird subconscious suggestion, this isn't something you want to really talk about? It's very mysterious. So no, I haven't asked my parents if they know about the meaning. My mom says she's had a conversation with ETs. I don't have full details on this, but the part I do remember, I can ask her sometime, but she was kind of overloaded last time I started hitting her with questions. But she remembers them saying, like, just don't worry about the future. If anything horrible happens, you and your loved ones will be taken care of.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a powerful message, and somewhat reassuring, if it's from a divine intelligence, an extraterrestrial intelligence, clearly something outside of this
Hmm.
realm. Powerful stuff.
That was an
Yeah.
interesting thing you just said too, a divine or extraterrestrial intelligence. There's a movement over the last couple of years to put all of these strange things under kind of one banner.
Mhm.
And there's a book out called Contact Modalities. There are some related books where they're talking about the similarities between like encounters with aliens, encounters with angels or demons, encounters with strange creatures. And there are tons and tons of similarities. And in fact, a lot of people think that ETs are actually demons. Like people who are highly religious just say, oh, ETs are not a thing, but these are demons from another realm.
Mm.
And it's really interesting looking at some of the correlations between them. Like they can make you forget things, both of them. They can, sort of have you show up in another place for a little while and put you back, and you might not necessarily remember it for years. There's suggestions they can change their appearance and all kinds of things like that. And some are nice and some are mean, but that's just like people. I think if there are really, friendly ETs or angels out there, then there are also going to be mean ones and things you might call demons. But most of them will probably fall in the middle. So,
Super interesting.
Yeah. And it would explain a lot of things. And I guess there's the ancient astronaut theory, and reports back to a lot of these encounters and experiences. People are saying, well, is it just the cultural mythology and context and conditioning of the time that's labeled them as you said, angels, demons, prophets, devils, whatever it might be? Could they all be encounters of aliens from another universe,
mm-hmm.
another galaxy, another place? It's just absolutely fascinating. You mentioned a story at the beginning, and I think just to unpack that a little bit, you mentioned you were in a partially materialized spacecraft. I mean, can we just get back to that? I mean, there was
Yeah.
about, like, did you see physical forms that you can say that was there?
Just for the briefest moment, all I saw was like, basically a black outline of what would be like a railing sort of up high. And then standing at the railing was like the outline of a human shaped thing. And I couldn't see, there were no walls on
Mhm.
the ship that I could see, but there was definitely a curved thing which suggested the room was round. We were sitting in a circle. Prior to that, we had been trying to contact um, through various meditation methods, but also various people in the group had devices that could detect changes in electromagnetic frequency or radio frequency, stuff like that. And they had been going off like kind of like crazy before this happened. They weren't making noise while that situation was going on. That kind of suggests that something either electromagnetically or radio frequency wise had changed well I had that experience. I'll tell another. I actually have a second story from that same week about a partially materialized UFO, um, which
Of course.
what are the odds? But we went to sit on the side of a mountain also to look for UFOs because you get a good vantage point from there. And it was by the Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado, and which looks like a desert. Like there's huge sand dunes that go on for miles, and you can't believe you're in, you know, North America in Colorado. But we got up there, like we drove up this road up the mountain, and there's kind of a parking lot partway up, and we thought, okay, it's a gravel parking lot. We'll just park our vehicles down here, and then set up a circle of our chairs and stuff in this gravel parking lot. And there was a waterfall nearby, and like very picturesque views, and a really steep drop off with no railing and stuff. So we got up there and set up, and this really, really thick fog came rolling in like out of nowhere. and it completely made it so that like you probably couldn't see your hand, this far in front of your face. But the fog did not come in inside our circle. It stayed outside the circle perfectly. Like the ceiling was of fog, like kind of arched down, the walls arched down to the floor walls. And so this fog wasn't coming in the circle. And we're all like, this is weird. Like, this is pretty weird because we can't see outside the circle at all. And we heard footsteps walking on the gravel going around us. But someone checked and like there was nobody there. We had these green laser pointers, which the thing about a green laser pointer is you can see the whole beam. So like if we saw something in the sky, you could kind of draw where you see it, and other people could just look at your beam and say, "Oh yeah, that's where he's pointing. Like he sees a light right there." So somebody turned on their laser pointer, and it hit the ceiling of this fog dome, and it went. You could see the beam hit the ceiling and go down the wall to the ground. I mean, lasers are not supposed to bend, and
No.
everyone's just staring at it like, what in the heck is going on? That is the craziest thing ever. Most people didn't have cameras or whatever because this was like 1 year after the iPhone with camera came out. And so I haven't really found any footage of it. But yeah, we're all looking at this green laser hitting the ceiling of this and curving down. Somebody else said, does anyone notice anything else? Or Dr. Greer said that. And we're all looking at each other and we're like, not really, but I think this is pretty weird enough, right? And then someone says, I can't hear anything. We're like, what? And everyone was quiet for a minute. We couldn't hear birds, we couldn't hear animals, we couldn't hear wind or trees, and we couldn't hear the waterfall that was like 100 or 200 meters away. Mm-hmm. Like it was dead silent in there. And this is, I later found out this is called the Oz effect, when all the sound around you dies and it's just like nothing. And then after a few minutes, the fog rolled out, and about a half hour total. The fog rolled out and we could hear the waterfall again and all the sounds of everything were back. And we're just like, that was crazy. We're like, we don't know what that is, but maybe something was partially there. Not so much that we couldn't walk through it, but enough to keep fog and audio at bay. That's not real. Like it seems like that can't be real. I heard those footsteps walking right behind me. With my back was to the cliff, actually. They'd have to walk very close to me to not fall off that cliff. And so I heard those footsteps walk past me. And they continued around the circle a couple times, but nobody was there. But yeah, we could only hear each other talking, really, and nothing from outside.
That's mind-blowing. Dr. Stephen Greer is quite a controversial figure, but from your experience, it sounds like he's quite proficient, and maybe he's had countless of these encounters. Were you led to believe that this is something that regularly occurs at these meetings out in Colorado?
Well, I'll first finish answering Carrie's prior question about how did I get there, and then I'll talk about that. So I was into UFOs and stuff because of all these experiences I'd had with the white light and the cottage and stuff like that. One time I was just Googling Dr. Greer. Oh, I went to see him speak at something in Toronto in 2001 where he was talking about the Disclosure Project that he had done right around the time of 9/11. And that kind of drowned it out in the news. But I went to see him speak at U of T, and I had somehow finagled a media pass. And I tried to get to him to ask some questions and stuff, but he kind of saw through my facade. And I didn't get to. It's like, nah, get out of here. So he's very standoffish, both on TV and in media events like that. Like he's super formal, very guarded, because he's had members of his team assaulted and attacked before, and he's had attempts on his life and stuff like that. So I was Googling him, and I saw he had this thing called the Ambassador to the Universe program, which is what it was called before it was called CE5 or Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind. So the idea was he would teach you how to be an ambassador for Earthlings towards extraterrestrial intelligence, but also for extraterrestrial intelligence towards Earthlings, like i.e. spreading the word that they're not actually evil and they want to have peaceful contact and stuff like that. Because in all of his years of initiating contact with them, he's never had anything bad happen through them. And I said, I got to go to one of these things. Like, I have to go become an ambassador to the universe it just sounds so cool. And so yeah, I applied and I paid the money that you have to pay to go, which it's not cheap.
Yeah.
But he basically put that fee in so that people who aren't serious about it don't go. There would be a lot of people who would be skeptical of something like that, and if you end up with jokers at a session like that, it's going to ruin it for everyone. So he made
Yeah.
it pricey so that only people serious about it would go.
Yeah.
And in person, he is super friendly, um, very spiritual, which he also doesn't show in his media experiences,
Mm.
and just a totally different person. And very willing to share everything he knows and everything that's going on.
Before you were asking, like the idea was if it was common that other people had these experiences when they went out with him. Is
Oh yeah,
that was?
I'm just
yeah,
curious because he's a fascinating figure. It divides a lot of people's opinions. Is he peddling something? There's money involved, and I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this. Look, I out of everybody wants there to be contact. I I love aliens. I would love for them to be here. I'm not sure if they are.
yeah,
For the first time, we've got somebody here in our podcast that's been directly involved. He's had experiences with Dr. Greer,
yeah.
and I'm just trying to get Derek's authentic take on that. And it would seem that he's not the only one. He mentioned another lady in that experience that also seen this kind of materialization of
Yep.
beings. Dr. Greer commented on each of those encounters. Do any of you guys notice the physics defying audio, the Oz effect, and all of this? So it would seem to me there's consistent and coherent events happening that he has been present with, and you were there, witnessed
I
that,
was
right?
there, yeah, and we were trying, like some of us were trying to figure out, like, is there any possible way he could be hoaxing this stuff? Because we saw
Mhm.
what we thought was like a satellite going from horizon to horizon directly over our group, and right when it got directly over us, it stopped at satellite height, stopped, right? And shone a blue light on our little sitting circle. Like it didn't go outside the sitting circle, it just shone a light on us and then it kept going. And we're like, what the heck is that? It's totally silent. It's not a helicopter. Like you couldn't hear anything. And we're just like, that's crazy. And then when that fog rolled out, we actually saw a UFO landed on the side of the mountain about a mile away, but it was only visible with fourth generation military night vision, which only one person had. Okay, like maybe this fourth generation military night vision has like a pre-recorded thing on it. So it's
Oh
showing
yeah.
us this UFO on that side of the mountain. And like he could convince us, that that's what's going on because we couldn't confirm it with earlier generation night vision or with infrared or with binoculars or your eyes. Nothing else could see it, just this fourth general.
Yeah.
And then we're all looking at the screen of this little night vision and he shines his green laser pointer over to where the UFO is on the mountain and you see it in real time on this screen. So we're like, okay, that you can't fake that in real time, not in 2009, not without really expensive hardware and software to do some kind
Yeah.
of compositing. Like he's circling where the UFO is, and you see his laser at the exact same time on the screen going around the UFO. But when you look with your eyes, there's nothing there, and there's a little orange ball going between the UFO and the ground the whole time. It was
Mm.
like the classic saucer shape, but we'd have to get past the waterfall and the water there to get over to it, so we couldn't actually go over to it. And I was just mentioning, as far as the money goes, like I think the money is there primarily as a barrier to jokers coming and like
Yeah.
just being like, ooh, UFOs, aliens, blah blah blah. I think in the last year he took Demi Lovato out, who's a famous singer, and she had encounters, and she's now like doing that as part of her kind of life mission, is promoting contact and seeing what else she can find out. There were definitely people who have been there multiple times. He gives a pretty steep discount to like repeat customers, if you want to call it that. But it's more like you're part of the family at that point. Like you've already bought into it and like you're fully invested. So
Yeah.
he already knows you're serious, so you don't have to pay that seriousness fee again. And yeah, he does make the movies and things, but I wouldn't suggest that he doesn't want to live comfortably because he was a doctor and he made a lot of money, and you wouldn't want to see your standard of living go down too far, especially for your wife and kids and other things. Like you wouldn't want them to pay the price for your interests, let's say. But I think most of it goes towards getting the word out more, teaching more people how to do this contact, because the thing about the person initiated contact or human initiated contact is the military could stop like an organization from going out and holding a contact event, right? But they can't stop me from going to the park 3 blocks from my house and sitting there and going like, come on, aliens, like, get down here, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm part of a Facebook group for people from London who want to go out and do CE5s, and we go out sometimes and do them. And like, we see cool stuff and we catch some on camera, and like, it works
Wow.
without Greer there. You don't need it. His CE5 contact app will walk you through all the steps that you need to do, and it gives you audio that helps and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm pretty bought in that he's legit, and he's working for the betterment of humanity, really, because he doesn't want to see something happen where we do something stupid militarily and it causes the visitors to be like, no, we can't stand by that, right? He's basically said that a lot of people have said this, not just Greer, but the only way they will intervene in our existence as a civilization is if we're about to destroy the planet, basically. Like,
Right.
if there's not going to be another opportunity for another generation to try and fix what's happened in the past, if we're about to nuke the whole world, they'll step in and just disable all the nukes and be like, no, try again. Like, but right up until that point, it's kind of on us, because just like parents with children, like you want them to learn on their own how to resolve these issues and how to grow. I like looking at it that way. It's like, they don't want to give us a
Yeah.
handout. Like, we really need to figure this out at a societal level.
Well, I'm gonna jump on that that kind of analogy to to teaching younger generations and ask you, is there a memory or a story that you share with younger generations that you hope they'll remember?
My kids, I have a daughter, or two daughters. Claire is 7 and Abby is 5. And they have a lot of trouble going to sleep and sleeping because there's monsters, right?
Mm.
And my wife gets super upset with me because she's not into any of this. And she's like, girls, there are no monsters. And I'm like, well, kind of, but there kind of are, though. You're right. So it's a real kind of difficult situation when daddy believes in monsters and you're trying to get your kids to go to sleep. I'm just like, look, yeah, I've seen ghosts. I think I've seen aliens. I've been near other things that are scary, I think. And none of them have hurt me. Like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's scary, but guess what? I'm fine. I'm totally fine. I used to wake up in the middle of the night with my ears bleeding or my nose bleeding, or
Really?
yeah, all the time as a kid. Like, or even now, I'll wake up with like a huge scratch on the back of my shoulder. Could be nothing. Could be I just scratched myself moving, but it's very strange that it always happens. But a lot of stuff has freaked me out, and none of it has actually hurt me. And so it's like, the only thing to fear is fear itself is true in my mind, at least until I get hurt. But,
Wait, do you tell them that part?
no, I don't mention that part. No, but I do teach them like visualizations. Like, okay, monsters don't like light, so you can visualize like a golden light being around you, and that actually, like, in the world that you see, that's not a thing, but in your mind world, that light is real and it creates a protection bubble, and they can't get through it. Or for my one daughter who's really freaked out because she's supposedly seen some like shadow people come out of her heat vent and stand beside her bed, and they take her up into the heat vent.
Mm.
For her, I put a webcam in her room that's pointed at the heat vent. I'm like, monsters don't like to be on camera. So, and this
Nice.
camera has night vision, like it can see everything. They're not going to come. And she hasn't had a dream like that since I put the camera in there. I kind of try to teach them like coping strategies and ways of looking at the world, instead of
Yeah.
just saying like, there are no monsters. I would like to keep their minds more open than just saying, that's not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
My wife says that's not a thing, and that's, fine. But I just say, if there are monsters, like, knowing how to visualize a protection bubble is handy, or having a camera, or having, your rosary or whatever. Anything that makes you feel stronger or safer can help.
Yeah.
I love that. It sounds like you're providing a toolkit for your kids in order to deal with many of the things that they will inevitably face in
Mm-hmm.
life. And I'm just curious, and maybe it's a little bit more serious, but when you were growing up, do you recall a particularly challenging phase in your life and how you navigated it?
Yeah, it wasn't good. Well, I was not good at it. So I got bullied a lot as far back as I can remember. I've always been like a bit overweight. And so there were some guys on the school bus that were just like, one guy in particular was relentless about it. And like, it was just painful, right? Like I'd get stomach issues every day before the school bus came. So I couldn't get out to the school bus, or sometimes my parents would force me to anyway. So I'd have to ride the school bus, and like, he'd be rousing me the whole way to school and stuff. And I remember just getting to the point where I was like, that's it. Like, I can't handle this anymore. And my grandpa was, he was a hunter, fisherman, um, sportsman slash gangster. But anyway, he had taught me how to do all this stuff. So one day I just took a knife to school. I had it in my pocket. It was actually like a thing that, like, it kind of looks like, it's like brass knuckles. It was like a T shape that goes between these two fingers, and then a triangular blade right here. Pretty scary thing. But so I had it in my hand in my pocket with that thing in it when I was walking to school, from the bus. And this was actually in grade 9, I think, because it was at high school. But he had bugged me all through grade school too. And I was like, if he bugs me again today, like, he's gonna get punched with this, and I'm gonna go to jail, whatever. Because I didn't know how to cope with it. I didn't have tools other than my dad teaching me like how to punch. But this guy was way stronger than me. Like, I knew I could not take this guy with a punch. And I should have probably spoken with teachers or anybody really. But um, at this point in my life, like now, currently, I don't really believe in coincidences anymore. But at the time, I
Mm.
thought it was a coincidence. Yeah, I got to school and I was walking in with this thing, and there were police everywhere. And it turned out that this guy who bullies me had just put somebody's head through a glass door,
Wow.
and they arrested him and took him off and put him in juvenile hall and never saw him again.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
What are the
right?
chances? I mean, it's really a synchronistic event. I mean,
Like,
you're driven to that point where you're prepared to bring a knife in. I mean, I can't imagine the suffering, and I just want to commend you for being courageous to share that intimate tale and how you navigated it. But when you said you don't believe in coincidences, I mean, what are the chances of that,
yeah.
right?
What I believe it is, as opposed to a coincidence, is I was, I think, attracting the help that I needed. And it's like, if you're praying to God, you're just asking, please help me somehow. You don't know what form it's going to come in. And
Hmm.
some people would say, oh, it's a miracle that, that this happened. And God works in mysterious ways. I don't talk about God so much. I think more in terms of like the universe, or sort of an all pervasive consciousness. And yeah, maybe it attracted those people to get into a confrontation before I got there, right? And
Yeah.
they weren't sure how it was going to pan out, but like, hopefully it would be beneficial to me. Or yeah, it was intense. And as a consequence of that, and other stressful times, I really try and talk to my daughters a lot and ask them how their day was and what's going on. And if something's bothering them, I kind of won't give up until they let me know what's bothering them, because I want to help them, as soon as I can, if anything is going on. And my daughter's in grade 2 now. So when she was in SK, she was getting bullied at her school. Um, and we found that out only by prying, like, at the dinner table. And we let her teacher know, and her teacher, like, called all the kids into the office, called their parents. Like, she went full nuclear, like, right away. And it was resolved within like 12 hours. Like, it was amazing. So it was really cool to experience that and see, how we could just make her life a lot less stressful, like basically through one call, but only because we had done all the talking necessary to find out what's wrong.
Well, again, thank you for sharing that and just kind of, yeah, talking through the tools that you give your kids and also what can be changed when you just openly talk about it to the right people. So as we're coming, with to our last few questions, I'm going to try to change the mood a little.
Yeah.
My question is, can you describe a recent incident or observation that made you smile or maybe reflect on the beauty of life?
I mean, with two little kids, those things happen all the time, which is so great. I mean, we just got a kitten about a month ago, and so we've had an old cat for a long time. Like she's like 16, so long before my kids were born, and so I think she's been just basically in sleep mode, like for their whole lives. Like she's not an exciting cat to have, so they're just like, oh yeah, there's Sammy sleeping in the sun again, right? But this kitten is a total spaz, and like they're loving just seeing how we named it Moon because we got we got him on a Monday, which is named after the moon, Moon Day, and he's got black and white coloring, and the moon has a dark side and a light side. That was my idea, but they all liked it. Seeing them for the first time in their lives need to interact with an animal on a regular basis, and like Claire's like, "Oh, can I clean the litter box?" I'm like, "Yes." um, or like they want to feed it or they want to pet it or have it sleep with them or unfortunately he broke his paw like a week after we got him because we
Oh.
have a steel fire door that automatically closes and he was just running and like saw the door closing and put his paws in to be like, I'm going to stop it from closing, and no, you're not. Like you're tiny and that door is very heavy, so it broke two bones in his paw and he's got a cast on. So you hear him running through the house like click, 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 click. It's like a pirate run, peg leg run. And it's hilarious. And like, it didn't slow him down one bit. Like he's still just loving it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so seeing them interact with that kitten every day is a gift for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. And I love how resilient like young animals are.
Yeah,
It's a beautiful acceptance of whatever the moment brings, right? And I think humans, we can really learn a lot from something like that. It's really, we're going with the flow here. Peg leg, no peg
yeah.
leg. Life is, and this is reality, and so I love that. Um, Derek, just as we're concluding, you're a fascinating guy. You've had a wealth of stories here that, to be honest, each one needs days to unpack. So I have to ask this: is there a piece of advice that you'd give to our listeners, or perhaps a personal story, or something that you would like to share and leave us with?
I'll say that going with the flow as opposed to trying to control everything
Mm.
has usually led to better outcomes in my life. I could give two quick examples. For one, my buddy decided to have his wedding as a destination wedding in Victoria, British Columbia, in Canada. So I flew out there, and for his bachelor party, he's like, "Okay, let's meet by this breakfast place. We'll have breakfast, and then we'll figure out what to do." And we're like, "Sounds great, right?" Um, but so we had breakfast. We go outside. We're sitting on this bench. We're like, "What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do?" And this girl driving like a VW minibus, total like Victoria hippie, right? She pulls up and she's like, "Hey, you guys looking for something to do?" We're like, "Yeah." She's like, "I'm going out to the cliff diving at the potholes if you want to come." We're like, "Yeah, cliff diving." So we just piled in her minibus and went out there. And like, half hour later, we're like jumping off this cliff 40 feet into ice cold mountain water. Like, yeah, I did break my wrist doing that, but other than that, it was like super fun. And then I had to try and be in his wedding with a huge cast on my arm that didn't really fit in the tux. I missed the rehearsal because I was getting a cast put on. Yeah, it was, it made for a good story. But also, I've toured around Europe twice. Once with a friend who was like, "Let's just go and see what happens." Once with a friend who was like, "Let's plan it all out." Guess which one was like way more fun? No plans, because if you bump into somebody, you don't have to say like, oh, I got to go catch my bus or my train or whatever. You can sit
Yeah.
there, let the conversation pan out. You might find you have something in common. And then once the other person realizes like, hey, these people are cool, that might turn into more things. Like they might say, hey, we're going to do this tomorrow. Do you want to come? Right. When we got to Amsterdam, we basically were out of money. And so we're like sitting there in Amsterdam, just like, we can't do anything because we don't have any money. And this guy came into the hostel we were at and he was like, hey, can I sit with you guys? And we're like, yeah, sure. Like we just chatted for a bit and got along. And he got up and left. And I think we went around and walked around or whatever for a while. And there are some very fancy places there, like super fancy restaurants in the main square and stuff. And later that night, around dinner time, I think he came back to the hostel and we're kind of still like, we had sat back in the same place. And he's like, you guys hungry? We're like, yeah, but we don't really have money for anything extravagant. He's like, I'm buying. Like, let's go. We're like, oh, okay. So he literally took us out to the main square to this like most expensive restaurant. And he's like, here, have a seat. And we're like, dude, you can't pay for this. And he's like, don't worry about it. And he just said, like, the waitress comes over and he's like, bring me your biggest bottle of champagne. And she's like, seriously? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, I just need to check your credit card first before I uncork. He's like, okay. And she's like, yep, checks out. And she comes out with like, it's like this tall of champagne. It's humongous. It had to be like 8 liters of champagne. And we're just like, what the hell? And then we ordered like all these dishes and we're like, how can you do this, man? You're just like, you're like 22 years old. Like, what's the heck? And he's like, oh, I bet my life savings on a soccer match earlier today and my team won. So I'm like rich. Yeah. So he was just like, whatever you guys want, like, oh, I'll pay for everything. And like, we just totally partied with him for the couple of days we were in Amsterdam.
That's awesome.
Yeah, totally.
That's hilarious. Nice timing.
That's
Yeah.
brilliant.
I feel like somewhere, you know, we've in our questions that we think about, we totally have questions about like serendipity and just kind of being in the right place at the right time. We didn't ask you, but you have tons of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And those only happen when you're following your gut, I think.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
No, I totally, like, I mean, even earlier in the conversation, just being open to things and going with the flow, with the exception of the broken wrist. That one didn't sound great, but it sounded like a fun experience before that.
Yeah. No, I had a rule. Well, I still have a rule, but it's just a lot harder to follow with kids. Which is that if you have a decision, like if somebody invites you to do something, like just default to saying yes if it will make a good story.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, because who doesn't want more good stories, right? So yeah,
good.
Let's go.
I love that. So that's a perfect point to end. I don't want to, but we're going to end our first of our Storyteller series with Derek Martin. Derek, I thought I knew you, but I feel like I've learned so much more about your life and your experiences. It was awesome to talk to you. I always enjoy a chance, so we'll have to do it again soon. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Carrie, and great to meet you too before. And I hope to chat with you again sometime.
Absolutely, Derek. It's been a blast. And to be honest, I'd love to unpack some of those stories with you at another stage. There's so much there. I mean, my head is literally spinning after this episode. I'm not sure I'm going to go outside today because I need to contemplate my life. Thank you, Derek. You're a brilliant guy, and it'll be a pleasure to have you on the podcast again.
Oh, it would be my pleasure too.
Like, I'm not going to lie, Derek, for a second. I honestly thought you were going to tell me. And then I went to jail and I did this other stuff, which like I wouldn't hold a case. I was like, man, he's done a lot of things I didn't know about.
I didn't go to jail. Yeah. I did walk across a minefield in Bosnia.
What?
I did see ghosts, and I have done a lot of looking for Bigfoot. And,
okay.
And I may have encountered a werewolf. I'm not sure.
What the heck, man? You can't just say things like that.
It's the trailer for the second episode that we have.